feral hog population continues to grow, causing tens of millions of dollars worth of damages to crops, livestock.
Imagine you're walking with your children in a forest when suddenly a predator appears in front of you. Instinct takes over, and you charge at that thing to protect your loved ones. But while your attention is fixed on the obvious threat, four others quietly slip behind you, take your children, and vanish before you even turn around. The entire attack lasts less than 5 seconds. You would never see it coming, right? As unbelievable as that sounds, one animal in Texas is using this exact strategy to remove thousands of America's most destructive invasive species. And it's happening so efficiently that it has forced wildlife officials to completely rethink how they fight feral hogs. So what is this mysterious predator? And how is it removing the feral hogs so efficiently? To understand this, we first need to look at what is happening across the state of Texas. A nightmare for farmers. Right now, over 6 million feral hogs are roaming across the United States. Some newer estimates put that number even higher, at nearly 9 million. They've already established populations in at least 35 states and are still spreading, pushing into places once thought impossible for them to survive. And nowhere is this damage more pronounced than in Texas. Nearly 3 million of these feral hogs now live in the state, and once you understand what these animals are capable of, it's easy to see why they've become such a nightmare. Because these aren't ordinary wild pigs. A mature boar can weigh around 200 pounds, while some grow well past 300. However, what makes them worse is that they're almost always hungry. Most travel in family groups known as sounders, made up of several sows and their young. And when a sounder moves through farmland, the damage happens with astonishing speed. They don't simply graze across a field. They root, driving their powerful snouts deep into the ground. They tear through the soil, searching for roots, insects, grubs, anything they can eat. By sunrise, an entire cornfield can look as though it had been plowed by heavy machinery. To make matters even worse, they smash through fences, tear apart irrigation lines, and churn up creek banks, leaving behind thousands of dollars in damage. And that's only one night. Stretch that damage across thousands of farms, ranches, and properties every year, and the numbers become almost unbelievable. Feral hogs are responsible for more than $1.5 billion in damage annually across the United States. And once you include disease control, property damage, and vehicle collisions, that number can climb to nearly $2.5 billion. Now, at this point, you might ask, if the problem is so severe, why hasn't the government done anything? The thing is, officials tried almost everything they could think of to stop these hogs. They have tried to shoot down these feral hogs from helicopters. They have built massive corral traps fitted with remote-controlled gates that could capture entire groups at once. They even tried toxic baits, hoping the hogs' constant hunger would make them eat the poison themselves. But no matter what they did, the hogs' numbers kept increasing. And in the end, it all comes down to one thing. They breed faster than almost anything else. A female feral hog can become pregnant before she's even a year old. She can produce 2 litters every year, with 4 to 10 piglets in each litter. Run those numbers forward, and wildlife biologists all arrive at the same conclusion. To simply keep the population from growing, you have to remove roughly 70% of all feral hogs every single year. Miss that number, and the population doesn't slowly increase, it explodes. So despite spending tens of millions of dollars every year on helicopters, traps, poison research, and contraceptive programs, the hogs continued to spread. They aren't simply winning the fight, they are one step ahead of everyone else. Which is exactly why what started happening in the hill country west of Austin caught everyone completely off guard. Because for the first time in decades, the hogs weren't multiplying. They had started to disappear completely. The disappearances. In the rolling oak and cedar country of central Texas, feral hogs had become part of everyday life. Ranchers would often hear them grunting and crashing their fields almost every night. But then, all of a sudden, something changed. A rancher would walk along a fence line he hadn't checked in weeks and suddenly realize the ground wasn't torn up anymore. The wallows had dried and hardened. He'd pull the memory card from a trail camera that used to record dozens of hogs every night. But now, he'd find days of empty footage interrupted by nothing more than a curious raccoon or the wind blowing through the grass. At first, nobody thought much of it. Maybe the hogs had simply moved somewhere else. Maybe a neighboring rancher had trapped them. But then, the exact same thing started happening on the next property, and then the one after that. Entire sounders were disappearing. Places where hundreds of hogs had rooted through the land for years suddenly went silent. For most people, that might have sounded like good news. But for the wildlife officials responsible for managing these animals, it was the exact opposite. It was a warning, because when large numbers of animals die, they leave evidence behind. A disease outbreak leaves carcasses. The smell carries through the air for days. Scavengers begin circling overhead. But none of that was happening. It felt like hogs had disappeared out of thin air. If hunters were responsible, people would have known that too. Instead, nobody was saying anything, and the numbers only made the mystery even harder to explain. Remember what wildlife biologists had already discovered? To simply keep a feral hog population from growing, nearly 70% of the animals have to be removed every single year. But this wasn't a population holding steady. It was collapsing, and experts couldn't explain why. So to find out the culprit, researchers decided to try something wildlife agencies have relied on for years: a Judas pig. The idea is surprisingly simple. Researchers capture a single feral hog, fit it with a GPS collar, and then release it back into the wild. Because hogs are highly social animals, the lone hog naturally goes searching for another sounder. And once it finds one, the GPS collar leads researchers straight to the group. But when one of those Judas pigs finally led researchers to another sounder, they discovered something science couldn't explain. The first clue: the Judas pigs directly led officials to sounders they never would have found on foot. And that's when they noticed something even stranger. The groups weren't staying together. Researchers would locate a sounder 1 week, then return a few days later to find fewer animals. Then even fewer the week after that. But who was removing these pigs and doing it all without getting noticed? Researchers ran through every explanation they could think of. They considered hunters, but there were no reports of large-scale culling. They looked into disease outbreaks, yet there were no carcasses scattered across the landscape. One by one, every theory fell apart. But just when researchers thought they had reached a dead end, a wildlife field technician found something surprising. He found it almost by accident while following a game trail on a property where the trail cameras had gone silent weeks earlier. At first glance, something felt wrong. It wasn't torn up the way feral hogs normally leave the ground. Instead, it looked like something had fought for its life. The dirt was scraped in every direction. Long drag marks stretched across the soft soil toward the nearby brush, suggesting that whatever had been there hadn't walked away, it had been dragged. And then there was perhaps the most shocking part of it all: the blood. Old, dark, and dried on a fallen log. Curious, the technician immediately began treating the area like a crime scene. He searched for shell casings, boot prints, TV tracks, but there was nothing. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't done by a hunter. The next obvious suspect was a mountain lion. The Texas Hill Country is home to mountain lions. They are rare, secretive, and perfectly capable of killing a feral hog. But mountain lions kill in a very specific way. They usually bring their prey down with a powerful bite to the throat or the back of the neck. Then they drag the carcass into cover, bury it beneath leaves and dirt, and return later to finish feeding. None of that had happened here. Instead, the signs of the struggle stretched across nearly 30 feet of ground. And perhaps, even stranger, the tracks were coming from more than one direction. That was the first detail investigators couldn't ignore. So the technician crouched down for a closer look. That's when he found the tracks. And suddenly, Nothing made sense. They weren't the tracks of some rare predator. In fact, they belonged to one of the most common animals in Texas. 4 toes, a small oval-shaped paw, claw marks just ahead of each print. These were the marks of a coyote. And the craziest thing, there wasn't just one mark. There were multiple. It looked like the whole group had attacked here. And that's what surprised the researchers, because coyotes don't hunt in groups. They were opportunists, scavengers, predators that survive on rabbits, rodents, insects, and whatever roadkill they happen to find. They weren't supposed to challenge a feral hog, especially not a mother protecting her piglets. So how was this even possible? The answer was hidden in a trail camera video that had been sitting unnoticed for years. The old footage. Instead of searching the woods for new clues, researchers went back to a place no one expected to find the answer: the archives. For years, trail cameras had been recording everything that crossed these properties. Thousands of hours of footage were collected for deer surveys, hog counts, and countless other wildlife projects. Most of it had been watched once, tagged, and forgotten. But what if the answer had been sitting there all along? This time, the researchers ignored the hogs and started looking for the coyotes. That is when a forgotten recording from 2014 immediately stood out. It came from a trail camera overlooking a feeder in the Texas brush. When someone first reviewed it years earlier, they gave it a simple label: coyotes scavenging on a carcass. Nothing unusual, nothing worth another look. And that's exactly why everyone missed it. Because once you believe you already know what's happening, you stop asking questions. You stop looking for anything different. But this time, instead of starting where the carcass appeared, they rewound the footage to the very beginning, minutes before the kill. The part nobody had ever bothered to watch. That's when the researchers realized it didn't look like scavenging. It was a hunt. But not just any hunt. It was unlike anything researchers had ever expected from a coyote. In the pale glow of the infrared camera, a sounder of feral hogs moved peacefully through the brush. A mother sow led the group, followed by a few younger females, while several striped juveniles wandered behind them. Everything looked normal, but the hogs had no idea they weren't alone. Hidden just beyond the tree line were 5 coyotes, and they were waiting for the perfect moment. That is when one of them slowly stepped into the open. The sow reacted instantly. She lowered her head and charged, determined to drive the intruder away from her young. At first, it looked like the coyote had made a mistake, but it hadn't. This was exactly what it wanted. As the sow chased the lone coyote farther away, the other 4 coyotes quietly slipped through the grass from another direction. They stayed low, they stayed hidden, and they headed straight for the juveniles. Only then did their real target become clear. They had never planned to fight the mother. Their goal was to separate her from her young. Within seconds, they isolated the slowest juvenile. 2 coyotes attacked, while the others secured the escape route. Before the sow even realized she had been tricked, the pack had already disappeared back into the darkness. The entire hunt lasted less than 5 seconds, and that was the moment everything changed. Researchers hadn't just witnessed a lucky attack, they had uncovered a strategy. Every coyote had a role. One acted as the distraction, the others waited, surrounded the target. Then, it struck at exactly the right moment. This was the kind of teamwork scientists normally associate with wolves or lions, not coyotes. And once they saw it, they couldn't stop wondering, how long had these animals been doing this? It wasn't one pack. At first, researchers thought they had discovered one unusually clever pack of coyotes. But the more trail camera footage they reviewed, the more they realized this wasn't an isolated event. They found the same hunting strategy again and again. Different counties, different cameras, different years. Every time, the pattern was almost identical. One coyote distracted the mother while the others quietly moved in on the juveniles. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a one-time success. It was learned behavior. And that raised an even bigger question. If coyotes across Texas were learning this strategy, how long had they been doing it without anyone noticing? The answer actually made perfect sense. Coyotes are among the most adaptable predators in North America. For more than a century, people tried to wipe them out with poison campaigns, bounty programs, and government control efforts. Yet instead of disappearing, coyotes spread into 49 U.S. states, surviving in deserts, forests, farmland, and even major cities. Their greatest strength isn't size, it's their ability to learn. When rabbits become scarce, they switch to rodents. If deer numbers drop, they eat insects, fruit, or whatever food is available. And in Texas, there was one food source they simply couldn't ignore: feral hogs. Once coyotes figured out how to hunt them, there was no reason to stop. And coyotes don't keep successful tricks to themselves. They pass them on. To find out if the trail cameras were telling the truth, wildlife agencies turned to something even harder to argue with: science. Researchers collected coyote scat from the affected areas, examined stomach contents, and analyzed them in the lab. The results confirmed what the cameras had suggested. In some study areas in Texas and Georgia, feral hog meat made up nearly 1/3 of a coyote's diet. This wasn't an occasional meal anymore. It had become one of their main food sources. That meant these packs were doing something humans had struggled to accomplish for decades. Instead of chasing adult hogs, they were removing the next generation before it had a chance to grow up and reproduce. And once officials realized the scale of this, they made a shocking decision. The unexpected decision. Once officials understood what was happening, they made a decision that almost nobody saw coming. In the specific areas where hog populations were collapsing, many of the large-scale removal programs were quietly paused. The helicopter hunts stopped. The expensive control programs were paused, and the people fighting the hogs were told to get out of the way, because for the first time, nature was doing the hard work. For decades, wildlife agencies had spent tens of millions of dollars trying to control feral hogs. They had used helicopters, traps, poison research, and countless other control programs. Now, they were placing their trust in an animal that those same agencies had spent more than a century trapping, poisoning, and shooting. But that doesn't mean the concerns have disappeared. Coyotes are capable of quietly removing wary 300-pound feral hogs across miles of Texas, but they weren't automatically something to celebrate. Officials still had questions. Could growing coyote populations create new problems for livestock? Could they threaten pets? Could they affect ground-nesting birds and other native wildlife? Those answers still aren't fully known. Even today, researchers continue monitoring what happens next. But compared to a control program that one official described as trying to bail out a sinking boat with a coffee cup, allowing a natural predator to do part of the work was difficult to ignore. If something was already reducing hog numbers, why interfere with it? So after all this, it isn't a complete victory, not even close. The feral hog problem hasn't disappeared. Remember the numbers. A single sow can produce 2 litters every year. Even with well-organized coyote packs hunting them, feral hogs can still reproduce faster than they are removed across most of the country. That's why what's happening in parts of the Texas Hill Country is important. It is slowing the population down, but it isn't eliminating it, and researchers still have plenty of questions. Does this same behavior happen outside Central Texas? Would it work in the swamps of Louisiana or the pine forests of Georgia, where the landscape is completely different? And if coyote numbers continue to grow, could they begin causing new problems for livestock, pets, or other wildlife? Right now, no one has all the answers. But one thing has become impossible to ignore. The predator most people dismissed for decades has suddenly become part of the solution to one of America's biggest wildlife problems. For decades, people believed the only way to stop feral hogs was to fight them harder. But sometimes the answer isn't fighting harder. Sometimes it's realizing nature already has a solution for it. So now the real question is, could coyotes eventually become one of the most effective natural controls for feral hogs? Or is this only a temporary advantage in a war the hogs will eventually win? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more documentaries uncovering the hidden side of science and nature, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.